Check it out.
Welcome to Top of the Class. Hear from education experts and get insights from high achievers to learn how you can do the same.
Get into those top schools.
Ready?
Proudly presented by Crimson Education, the world's leader in university admission support.
Hey everyone, I'm Alex, the host of the Top of the Class podcast. And to celebrate coming up to 10,000 downloads, thank you to all you amazing listeners out there, I thought I'd go through some of the common threads that I see between a lot of the students that I interview. And I have interviewed around 50 of the world's highest achieving students just through the podcast alone. So I thought I'd go through maybe the top 5 things that I tend to see from all these amazing students. Number 1, self-learning. A lot of these students are taking big concepts and they're tackling them head on. They're not really waiting for school to kind of come up with the subject area and get into it there. They're going on YouTube primarily and trying to get an introduction into these topics. And then they're going into further fields like maybe an online course. They're getting into things like Discord or Slack groups. They're perhaps talking to a professor that they're contacting at a university. Whatever it is, they're usually self-learning a fairly niche topic. So a couple of good examples of that is the Time Magazine Kid of the Year, Gitanjali, who learned about carbon nanotubes when she was 14 years old to help detect lead in water. And she said, you don't have to be an expert in all things chemistry and biology. She only really wanted to learn about carbon nanotubes. And in the space of a couple of months, she actually knew quite a lot about that area. And there's a whole lot of other students on the show who, instead of trying to, tackle this massive broad theme, they usually tackle a smaller area within a existing topic. And that's what they focus on and that's what they get good at. And a lot of them agree that if you spend, say, 2 to 3 months learning a small topic rather intensely, you can end up being in the top, 5 to 2% of people around the world who are experts in that topic. Number 2 is support network. Now, this goes without saying that if you're going to be on the top of the class, you're probably doing pretty extraordinary things. And as a result, having a support network is really key. Now, for a lot of students, that is, obviously your parents. So parents play a very key role in understanding that these extracurriculars that a lot of the students are doing are a big part of their life, and they're totally behind the student in, go and do these things. We think you are going to be great at them. And a lot of the time it doesn't happen necessarily naturally. Sometimes it involves a conversation between the student and the parent. This is something that I often talk about the students with on the top of the class. How did you get your parents on board with the fact that you were going to be spending a whole lot more time, say, doing this extracurricular rather than studying? And sometimes, it's a conversation. Sometimes it's a couple of weeks or months before the parents really realize the benefit of spending time in that extracurricular. It can be a whole range of different things, but definitely getting your parents on board is a big part of it. Then the wider support network can be, as I said, Discord or Slack groups can be a fantastic network to find amazing students who are like-minded, who are doing similar things. They can be even a little bit older, university researchers potentially, or even potentially professors at some universities can be part of the wider support network as well. But whatever you're looking at, make sure that you have a couple of people who really believe in you and who want to support what you're doing. And if you've got some friends there who are, I guess, the quote-unquote haters who are like, oh, you're not going to go and solve these world problems, why don't you just be a normal student for once? Don't worry about them too much. They'll come on board once you start getting success. So usually we see either the haters disappearing completely or turning from haters into your new best friends once they see the success that you're creating. Number 3 is very much a mindset thing, and that's believing that they are the right person at the right time to make a difference in any given situation. So a lot of these students, I guess, are tackling these big problems, and it's easy, I guess, for some students to look at these problems and say, well, I'm only in high school, or I'm only in, first year university or whatever. It's not my problem. Or I'm, just one person. I'm sure other people around the world are working on this. I'm not going to make it my problem. But a lot of the students who get onto the podcast, they see as not themselves solving the problem entirely, but them being a part of the solution. And I think that's a really key thing. You don't need to go out and say, oh yeah, I'm going to solve world hunger tomorrow, for instance. It's saying, I'm going to make a small impact in this big problem, and I'm going to make my own impact, whether that be, in raising money or whether it be raising awareness, whatever it might be. You're making a small but it's definitely an important effort in solving these global problems. So having the right mindset to tackle these big issues is certainly an important thing, and understanding that you don't necessarily need to be the one person who's solving this thing, but that you are a part of a global solution or a global effort, that's really, really key. And for the entrepreneurs out there, one thing I tend to see all the time is students saying that the idea needs to be separate from you, not a part of you. So if the idea fails, it's not that you are a failure, it's just that the idea wasn't the right one at the right time. It didn't go into the market as well as you thought it would go. So don't necessarily associate the failure of your idea with your personal failure as well. And understand that your journey as a young entrepreneur is not through one vehicle, but it could be through any other idea that you come up with. But I guess one of the really important things is once you have an idea, is knowing which ideas are likely to keep going forward for a little bit longer. So I tend to see a lot of students on the show who say, I came up with a great idea, I realized it was worth following, and I followed it. And then also it's understanding when to quit something. And I'm always fascinated by that, how students are able to understand the moment where it's like, this is probably not worth continuing. I've given it a really good go. I've learned some great lessons, but now it's time to look elsewhere. So a lot of those mindset things are really key to progressing above and beyond what you might be doing in high school. They're not just a student. Not that there's anything wrong with being a student, but a lot of these students that I chat to on the show, they think of themselves as either an author or an entrepreneur or an activist. So they're really mentally kind of in this space already where they're looking for these things to solve, or they're looking for these opportunities because that's who they identify themselves as. So if you don't have like a brand or a personal brand or identity that you necessarily connect with just yet, like you're just a student, that's fine, but it might be worth looking into some of these other areas that you can start pushing your personal brand into a little bit more. Now, you don't need to have written a book to start calling yourself an author. You don't need to have started a business to start calling yourself an entrepreneur. It could be that idea that you want to aspire to that in the future, and immediately it starts opening your eyes to these other opportunities that are out there. So I've seen that a few times from students on the show. One recent example of that is Jenk. I thought he had a great story where I said, like, he's got a global media company. And I said, at what point does a website become a media company? He was like, as soon as you start calling it a media company is when it starts becoming one. So I think that's a really good way of looking at things, is just trying to put yourself in that headspace and trying to give yourself that understanding that that is your calling, that you want to go in that direction. That's fantastic. And the last thing I'd say, which is usually pretty elusive, is this whole idea of passion. Now, a lot of students are getting told, find your passion, do what you're passionate about, follow your heart. I generally think that that's pretty rubbish advice. I think it's something that I've chatted to with students on the show a fair bit. Like sometimes they say, yeah, you just got to follow your passion. And I often say, okay, well, take us back a little bit. Where did your passion start from? And usually it starts with an interest or a curiosity, or something happened to, a member of your family or your friends, or you saw a problem that could be solved. And then you got more interested, and then you got more interested, and then you started becoming, more knowledgeable in that field. And after like 6 months, 12 months, maybe even longer, it starts becoming a passion. So one of those things that I think a lot of people tend to say to students is just follow your passion. If you don't have one just yet, don't worry. Start off with what you're curious about, or start off with what you're interested in, or start looking at the problems, that you think you might be able to solve in your close community. And then, research it a little bit more, start learning a little bit more. And after a little while, soon enough, it could well become your passion too. So don't put too much pressure on yourself to go and chase the next passion, or don't put too much pressure on yourself because you don't necessarily feel that passion just yet. Just make sure that you've got a few things that you're interested in or curious about, and start following them as well. And the last thing that I'd like to say is that while the students that we've had on the show often have pretty impressive, sometimes quite intimidating bios and profiles, it doesn't mean that they're like not human, if you know what I mean. Like, these students are very, very human. They've had failures, they've had challenges along the way, and sometimes they've just been the right person at the right time to take up these opportunities and kind of forge a path in the right direction. So even though you might be listening to the show, and I know sometimes I'm chatting to these students thinking, what have I done with my life? I'm nothing compared to some of the students who are only half my age and doing these amazing things. don't feel intimidated by these students. Make sure that you see it as an opportunity to learn and to grow along with them, and understand that they've been on these journeys for often like a year, 2 years, 3 years, perhaps even more, and have learned a whole lot along the way and have had some failures along the way too. So as you know, intimidating as these profiles might be, I hope you get inspired by them and really enjoy the Top of the Class podcast. That's it from me. Make sure to check the link in the description. As I said, we're at 10,000 downloads. We would love to share the story of the Top of the Class podcast with many, many more students from all around the world, because these students have amazing stories to share, and I'm sure you will benefit greatly from having a listen. Thanks so much, and look forward to having you on the show. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Top of the Class. Subscribe for future episodes. For show notes and to plan your best future, head to crimsoneducation.org.